Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm thrilled to see that so many of you had joined us today to hear the presentation, Our Pandemic Future, Human Behavior and the Environment. My name is Paqui Paredes Méndez. I'm the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Western. And as I said, I'm thrilled to see so many of you joining us today. So thank you for joining us for the inaugural Western Horizons event, which is brought to you in partnership with the College of Humanities and Social Sciences and the Western Alumni Association. Western Horizons is a public webinar series featuring faculty and alumni of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and we're going to try and make it happen about once a quarter. Starting with, these are inaugural event today. Topics that we will cover in Western Horizons will be of diverse interests, and that will stretch across the college's 14 departments and 2 interdisciplinary programs, research centers, 2 community-based training clinics, and 5 nationally accredited professional programs, including public health, which we will hear more about today. It is my great pleasure to start the event by introducing to you our 2 speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Evelyn Ames. Dr. Ames has been creating critical links between Western alumni, health professionals, and the community for more than 5 decades. As a professor emerita of Western Washington University's Department of Health and Human Development, Dr. Ames came to Western in 1964. You won't believe it when you see how young she looks, though. During her time at Western, she developed and implemented the Bachelor of Science degree in Community Health and was its solo faculty member for more than 3 decades. She also established community partnerships in the healthcare arena that continue to provide internship opportunities to students. Upon retirement in 2003, she began writing a health column in 2005 for the Western Washington University Retirement Association, and she continues to do so. The latest ones focusing on friendship, gratitude, laughter, and the arts, and how they affect health. I know many of us have been very appreciative of all of these opportunities as we face the COVID pandemic and our obligation to stay home. Let me now introduce Dr. Bennett, who will be given the formal presentation today after Dr. Evelyn Ames talks to us a little bit about public health and the program at Western. Dr. Steve Bennett is an expert in epidemiology and ecology of infectious disease. His interest in infectious disease began as a Peace Corps volunteer working on public health programs in Kenya. Bennett received his master's in tropical medicine and parasitology from Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. Afterwards, Dr. Bennett worked in South Sudan on President Carter's Guinea worm eradication program, and then returned to the States to complete his PhD in environmental infectious disease at the University of Minnesota. He has taught courses in public and environmental health, global health, disease ecology, and environmental sustainability. His previous research has focused on the spread of tick-borne disease in Minnesota and LGBTQ health in Kenya. Currently, Dr. Bennett is a lecturer in the Community Health Program, soon to be Public Health Program, in the Department of Health Human Development at Western Washington University. And before I pass on the baton to our 2 speakers, let me just do a couple of housekeeping items. Some of you have submitted questions, and we very, very much appreciate your engagement even before the talk starts. If you have additional questions, please use the Zoom and the question and answer feature, which should be at the bottom middle of your screen. We will be monitoring the chat and responding to questions at the end of the talk. Additionally, a link to the recording will be shared with each of our registered guests after the event, and you're welcome to share with your friends and family if you so want. And with this, I'm gonna pass it on to Dr. Ames. And she will talk to us, as I said, about the history of the public health program here at Western. Evelyn?
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. And I really am going to talk about what is community health education. And if I were to do the history of the program, that would take quite a bit of time, because it started back in 1974 in the catalog, or 75. But I'd like you to, I'm doing an analogy. Think about a large umbrella, and under that large, and call that public health. And under that umbrella include such areas as sanitation, statistics, epidemiology, infectious control, administration, supervision, and community health education. And so I've written some notes, so I'll stay on target here in my few minutes. But public health is a very large area, and within that area of community health education, there are various responsibilities and competencies that in the program at Western, the students do acquire those through various coursework and their internship. And so I would like to say that the health educator has been listed in the U.S. Department of Labor for a long time. So if you're interested in what the U.S. Department of Labor lists as a health educator, you can go to there and list health educator. But right now I'm thinking of the relevance of health education due to what's going on in our communities and in our society. So I'll give you an example. Let's take young children and their isolation. What we would do as a health educator is analyze or evaluate what are their health education needs. And we narrow it down and decide, okay, we're going to do this area, and let's take a food desert for the children. And what we would do is then develop a program and find the resources and the materials and use the methodology to do the educational program. And then of course, we're going to do an assessment of how successful we're at. That is in a nutshell what a health educator would do. Assess, develop a program, present the program, the resources, etc. It's important to note that we don't really tell what to do, but we educate people in making their decisions where they can find the resources. And I always was amused at students that come and say, I want to tell people how to live healthily. I want to tell them what to do. I sort of smile and say, all right, now let's back up a bit and let's see what we can do with that about telling them. And if you know what's going on related to the viral and pandemic, people are saying, you can't tell me what to do. I don't want to do that. And so we're getting people, depends on your political view, but let's say that people are saying, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. I don't know if I believe you, because there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation about the virus and what to do healthily. So it's a matter of, here's the program, here you make your decisions, and people who do that generally will follow a healthier route, shall we say, instead of, I don't like this, what you're telling me to do, and I'm not going to do it. And it does concern me as to the people who are just absolutely doing nothing to protect the health of other people. One of the questions is, well, let me not do the question, but what I see needing to be done, and I'm reading a bit about it, are children and adults and older adults and the social and emotional toll it's taking on them of social isolation, the physical distancing, the social distancing. And I see the need for educational programs, whether they be in the schools or in the community. And as for what, I do see some programs occurring that relate to a nonprofit organizations. One I'm aware of, as I serve on the board in town, is the Arthritis Foundation, and nationally it's doing programs to educate those families and children and adults with various forms of arthritis, which, if you didn't know, there are over 100 different forms. And so with that, let's see if I have a few other things to mention here. Oh, I want to finish with this, because that'll give Steve time to really get into the little critters that cause some of our disease. If you educate me as to why various health behaviors are important, for example, wearing masks now, then I can be proactive in incorporating behaviors that contribute to my well-being, to my family's well-being, to my community's well-being, as compared to being told what to do, when to do it, without any understanding or knowledge for doing it. So that's my little spiel, and Steve, it's on to you for your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Ames. I will go ahead and share my screen so that we can see the presentation. So the presentation I'll be giving today, as many of you know, is entitled Our Pandemic Future. And this is really where I would like to look at infectious disease and pandemics through a broad lens and understand the complexities of how our behavior and our engagement with the natural world can increase or decrease the chances of infectious diseases spreading through populations, as well as some of the variables and drivers that increase that spread and the rate of that spread. And so when we begin thinking about this, I started just trying to think about what is our current world? What is the current state of pandemics within the globe and our populations? And as you can see, I think we all immediately go to COVID-19 and our emergent coronavirus that we've had dealing with. Currently for COVID-19, our official death count is 383,000, almost 384,000. I have an asterisk on that because for our global count, I'm fairly confident that that is woefully undercounted at this point, because globally we have a lot of countries that are dealing with COVID-19 that don't have strong public health structures or reporting structures. So we're going to be missing many people who are dying from COVID-19 in our official counts. Even in the United States, there's strong evidence that our count is undercounted. But in addition to COVID-19, we still have other pandemics that we're dealing with. HIV, still a serious pandemic globally. In 2018, there were 770,000 deaths from HIV. The death rate is going down per year, slowly but surely, due to increased medications, as well as interruption of transmission. But this is still a very serious pandemic that we are dealing with. Ebola. We have various flare-ups of Ebola, even since the kind of more global pandemic that we dealt with in 2014, 2015. The Democratic Republic of Congo is currently dealing with 2 separate epidemics of Ebola, while also dealing with the epidemic of COVID-19 in their country, as well as the world's worst measles epidemic. And as you can see with Ebola, why we don't necessarily have the hundreds of thousands of numbers within each of those epidemics, we can see case fatality rates of 50 to 90% depending upon the epidemic of Ebola. Beyond that, we have our influenza viruses, where each year, whether it's our seasonal influenza or newly emergent novel pandemic influenzas, estimates globally from the WHO, depending upon the year, are up to 650,000 deaths per year due to influenza viruses. Even beyond that, we're dealing with malaria, a disease that we've dealt with in humanity for hundreds of years. And we're still seeing about 435,000 deaths from malaria per year. And we've been dealing with a decades-long cholera pandemic. And diarrheal diseases related to cholera. We think there's upwards of 4 million cases of cholera globally per year, with about 21,000 to 143,000 global deaths worldwide. And again, those are estimates because many of those cases are never reported and are often in children. But there's a few features that I look at when I look at this. And I remember even looking at this slide and thinking about the title of my presentation, saying that, you know, this is our pandemic future. And I began realizing that even without COVID-19, we've been living in a pandemic world. And the title of my talk today started feeling more like a misnomer, as pandemics are our past, present, and future, and that they are things that we have been living with, are living with, and will continue to live with in the future. And there's a few variables that I think that are really important to look at. If you look at these top 4 pathogens, we can see that all of these have animal origins, where these are pathogens that have spilled over from our various animal species and are what we refer to as zoonotic in origin or involve zoonotic transmission. The second thing, and the second variable we see, especially with these final couple of pathogens, is that they are heavily driven by climate and the environment. And both climate and the environment can increase or decrease their transmission. And how we as human beings engage with the environment and change our climate can severely impact the transmission of these pathogens. On top of all of this, and this mixture of risky variables includes our increased population that we see globally. And with increased population, we're seeing increased density. So more people living together in smaller spaces and more density, which increases transmission rates for almost all diseases. On top of increased population and increased population density, over the past couple of decades, we've seen increased movement, people having more access to moving globally, which also mixes our populations and allows for more transmission and movement of pathogens as well as people. All important things to think about as we begin looking forward in our world. So one of the questions is, why do we see so many pathogens from animals? From the CDC, we know that about 60% of infectious diseases that occur in people can be spread from animals, and we get those from animals. And if we talk about newly emerging infectious diseases, so these are the diseases that have been discovered in the last 30 to 40 years, we can see about 75% of all of our emerging infectious diseases in people actually come from animals. So animals as a reservoir and a natural reservoir for disease is becoming increasingly important in human health. Some of the drivers of what is causing these spillovers from animal species into humanity includes the environments we live in, how we raise our food, and then how we're changing and impacting natural environments and animal populations, and how we engage with and contact animals. This includes domestic animals as well as wildlife, as both are great sources of disease for humanity. And I really like this visualization because I think it really looks kind of at the variables of disease emergence, reemergence, and persistence. In the squares, you can see how the human domain, the environmental domain, and the animal domain all engage with each other and can increase or decrease our risk for transmission of infectious diseases, especially in those interfaces of where humans engage with the environment and humans engage with animals. First, I really want to talk about that human-animal interface, where we see our use of animals as food, wildlife management practices, as well as habitat encroachment on animals, and how we engage with the animal domain in that way, where we see geographic ranges of animals changing, behaviors of animals changing, as well as the loss of biodiversity. So when we first look at our food production, we can see that globally our food production and use of animals as food has increased dramatically, as well as through our livestock revolution. The intensity in production of animals and the ways that we use animals has changed. We've increased antibiotic agents amongst animals, which leads to antibiotic spread, which can spread to humans and the environment. You can also see that the ways in which we are raising animals for food productions has increased the density of animals in small spaces. This increases the risk of transmission of pathogens amongst those animals, which also increases the ability for those pathogens to then spill over into human beings. Our husbandry conditions has also led to a decline in genetic diversity among many of our animal species, thereby decreasing their chances to fight off pathogens and increasing the chances that those pathogens will also spill over into human populations. In addition to animals for food production, we've also seen shifts in landscapes and how we've changed the landscapes around us. Specifically, we've seen increases in urbanization and deforestation. We see people moving into deforested lands and increased populations in those lands, which increases encroachment on wildlife. And is increasing that contact between humanity and large urban and high density areas with wildlife, as well as livestock animals and their contact with wildlife. And all of these contacts and interfaces increase the chances that many of these pathogens can spill over from wildlife into our domestic animals and thereby into humans, or even directly from wildlife into human populations. And that increased density in those areas allows those pathogens to then transmit between human beings at a much more rapid pace than previously. Here in this image, you can see Southeast Asia and the dramatic deforestation that we're seeing in Southeast Asia from the 1950s up to 2020, where we see populations decreasing natural habitats for wildlife and moving into those areas. And we'll see what some of the effects of that are with a case study here. The case study I'm going to look at is Nipah virus. So Nipah is a virus that exists within bats. Specifically these flying foxes that you can see here. And pigs became really important in this situation, specifically in Myanmar, Malaysia, where we first started seeing large epidemics of Nipah. Increased pig production was occurring in the region. You can see what some of those pig farms may have looked like. These farms were outdoors. Pig production was increasing. The amount of pigs in farms was increasing. So we had lots of pigs on large industrial farms that were exposed to bats. At the same time, we had more bats moving into these areas where humans and pigs were living because of the deforestation and because of access to food. One of the other ways that farmers were increasing their monetary value of their farms was by planting fruit trees and using fruit trees as secondary sources of money. These fruit trees then became roosting spots and food sources for bats. These bats were moving in and engaging with domestic animals as well as humans in these situations. And we essentially set up a perfect spot for the emergence of a new pathogen in human populations. And so Nipah began showing up in outbreaks. Nipah causes a range of illnesses from asymptomatic or subclinical illness to acute respiratory illness as well as fatal encephalitis. We can also see that the virus causes severe diseases in animals, such as pigs, and can lead to significant economic losses for farmers. And even grander, we can see that when Nipah moves into human populations, our case fatality rate can be 40 to 60%. And when it gets into pig populations, which can serve as a vector of disease for humans, pig populations, many of them showed 100% infection rate. Where all of the pigs had it, and they would end up with barking coughs, and these coughs would amplify the virus and actually spread them to more human populations. Here you can see in this image, the bats roosting in trees would eat fruit or mangoes and leave their droppings behind, as well as saliva on the mangoes when those got knocked down. The pigs would eat those, become infected with the virus, and then transmit the virus to humans. This became even more complicated in secondary outbreaks, as well as outbreaks in other countries, where we began seeing that the pigs were actually no longer necessary in the transmission of Nipah. And we started seeing Nipah being transmitted directly from bats to humans, and evidence of human-to-human transmission as well, especially with date palm sap and the farming production of date palm sap being a food source. And a food source that would transmit the virus to humans, as bats would sneak into these date palms sap collection areas at night to eat some of the date palm sap and then infect it, and then humans would sell it and transmit it that way. Also showing some of the economic impacts of this, in Malaysia between 1998 and 1999, due to this outbreak, over 1.1 million pigs were culled in the nation. Nipah also has a cousin that emerged before Nipah did. They're both in the same genus now. And the second one is Hendra, which emerged in Australia. Hendra is also another lesson about changing ecologies, deforestation, and how domestic and wildlife animals interact with each other that can increase transmission of infectious diseases. We once again had our flying foxes as our natural reservoir of Hendra virus. However, in this situation, we had a loss of natural contiguous forested habitat for these flying foxes within Australia. And due to increased food sources in urbanized environments, we actually started seeing increased urbanization and habituation amongst these flying foxes. So they were becoming more comfortable and changing their behaviors around human populations because human populations had a new food source for these bats and had removed their natural wildlife areas. So we actually then started seeing more stagnant populations of bats due to decreased migration. All of this essentially combined with our introduction of horses into these environments led to increased contact with domestic animals and humans. And horses actually became an amplifier for the virus. For Hendra, human beings can't get the virus necessarily directly from flying foxes in a way that causes disease, but horses amplify the virus and actually are able to transmit the virus to humans when they're dealing with the disease as well. It is a highly fatal disease for both horses and humans in this situation. In addition to landscape and animal changes, we also see the relationship between climate change and infectious disease. When we talk about climate change, we're talking about that broad range of global phenomenon created mainly by burning fossil fuels, adding heat-treating gases to the Earth's atmosphere. And really what I want you to focus on here is the broad range of global phenomenon. So here we're seeing increased warm weather, increased global temperatures, as well as increased dramatic weather events and changes in a lot of water and precipitation events globally. One of the big diseases that we'll look at that is impacted by climate change would be malaria. Some quick facts about malaria is we had 228 million cases in 2018, which led to over 400,000 deaths. About almost $3 billion in funding goes into malaria campaigns globally per year. When we talk about malaria populations and populations most impacted by malaria, we're generally talking about sub-Saharan Africa and specifically children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. Our current data is showing that a child dies about every 2 minutes from malaria. Malaria has a very complicated life cycle. And it also has a very complicated relationship to humans and to the environment, as well as to its mosquito vectors. There's a couple of variables that I really want to focus on here, though. First is, as you can see in the middle here, temperature becoming a hugely important variable for malaria. We see that temperature can actually change the behavior of mosquitoes, increasing their biting rates. When we increase the biting rate of a mosquito, we increase the chances that mosquitoes can become infected from humans. We also increase the chances that mosquitoes can infect new humans when they transmit the pathogen in this case being a protozoan. The other thing that's important when we think about global warming is increased precipitation events, as well as increased precipitation in many areas, leading to increased mosquito populations. So therefore, we're changing the behavior of mosquitoes. We're also changing the number of mosquitoes in many areas. And one thing that's truly important to pay attention to as well is the fact that humans that are living in current endemic areas for malaria, meaning that they are exposed regularly to malarial parasites throughout the year, if these people live past the age of 5, they actually end up building immunity over a current period of time. But what we do see is that if malaria is introduced to new populations that are not previously exposed to the malarial parasite, they actually face more severe disease because they have no naturally acquired immunity over time. The same thing is true in areas where we see short bursts of seasonal malaria. Because malaria in those areas is seasonal, people aren't regularly exposed to the parasite. So when it does show up during a short season, the disease and the pathogenicity of it is worse for people. Here is some evidence showing the larval and adult equilibrium abundances. So we can see here that as temperature increases, the number of larvae that we see being produced in breeding sites actually increases as well. The same thing with adult mosquitoes. We do see that there is a point of temperature where we actually will start seeing reduction in larval production and reduction in mosquito production. and that's important to take note of as well. But definitely showing the relationship between temperature and production of mosquito populations. The next thing that we can see is the relationship between temperature and epidemic potential, where we're looking at Plasmodium or the pathogen reproduction in mosquitoes, the biting rate of mosquitoes, as well as the reproduction and increase in mosquito populations themselves. We can see that as temperatures increase to a point, getting to between 90 and 95 degrees, we see increased chances of epidemics of malaria. And this is true for multiple species of malaria. Here we're looking at Vivax and Falciparum, Falciparum being the most virulent of our pathogens for malaria. And the geographic change with climate change of malarial areas is what is going to be really important to pay attention to. Here we're looking at sub-Saharan Africa, and we're looking at essentially increased temperatures going up to about 2100, so the end of this millennia, and looking at the changes and the geographical expansion of malaria due to changes in temperature. And one thing that I think is really important to look at is if you look at the smaller map of sub-Saharan Africa within each map, and there you can see the percent increases over time of populations that are exposed to consistent malarial transmission and exposure to malaria. And as you can see, any of those red areas are showing greater than 100 or greater than 80 to over 100% increase in malaria transmission and exposure to malarial parasites. And it's really important to note that these are new populations being exposed to malaria at greater rates. And so these are going to be highly susceptible populations that don't have previous immunity to the malarial parasite. And we may see greater deaths as well as a greater burden of disease amongst these populations due to this new exposure. So when we look at malaria, we see changing geography, as well as moving into new populations, increasing mosquito reproduction, increasing biting rate, as well as increased parasite production, all due to changing temperatures. But on top of that, we see environmental shifts with water and drought, as well as extreme weather events. And after extreme weather events, such as hurricanes or floods, we also tend to, over the course of a year, see increased mosquito-borne diseases due to lots of standing water, as well as destruction of homes and the environment in general. There are other mosquito-borne diseases that are impacted by climate change, including dengue, chikungunya, Zika, and West Nile. West Nile being one of our viruses that is transmitted through birds as well, and relationships between birds and mosquitoes. And lest we think that these diseases are diseases that other countries deal with, but that we don't have to worry about in the United States, here you can see that the Deep South, specifically in the United States, is highly vulnerable to many of those mosquito-borne diseases, including dengue fever and malaria. Dengue fever already showing up in many of our southern states, as well as Hawaii, transmitted by multiple mosquito vectors. Waterborne diseases are also highly impacted by climate change and changing environments. Currently, we can see that over 2 billion people lack safe water at home, with about over 150 million people who drink water directly from surface sources, such as streams or lakes, where they're highly vulnerable to infiltration from various infectious diseases. Many of these infectious diseases that we get from water sources cause diarrheal disease, including diseases like cholera. These diarrheal diseases are one of the top killers of children globally. And we can see this is back from 2012, but even in 2012, diarrheal diseases among children killed more children than malaria, measles, and HIV/AIDS combined. So these diarrheal diseases are of huge public health importance and huge global health importance. In addition to these diarrheal diseases, there are multiple waterborne pathogens, including protozoans, worms, bacteria, and viruses. In the United States, we have issues with many of these, including Cryptosporidium, as well as E. coli and leptospira, which causes leptospirosis, where we'll actually see many of our public waterways closed down from engagement with humans because of these viruses getting into our water sources. One really important one to think about within the context of climate change is Vibrio cholerae, so the agent that causes cholera. We can see the relationship between cholera production in water and increased risk of transmission in water sources with temperature. Here we followed water temperatures over the course of a few years and also tested the rate of reproduction of cholera and the density of cholera within those water sources. And you can see a high correlation between the amount of cholera that's able to reproduce in water with the temperature of that water. So as we see global temperatures rise and we see especially groundwater and surface water temperatures rise, we see an increase in risk for a lot of these pathogens reproducing and essentially being able to transmit easier from these waters, so that when you drink water, you get a higher exposure to many of these waterborne pathogens due to increased temperatures. Increased temperatures aren't, again, the only variable we need to think about when we think about waterborne disease and climate change. Climate change increases dramatic weather events, such as flooding and hurricanes specifically. And in hurricanes, we see massive production of water and spread out, as well as destructions of homes. So we see people in situations where flooding, hurricanes, and waterborne disease become essentially a perfect storm in a situation, to use that colloquialism. So you can see, even looking at this image, how people could be highly exposed to many of these waterborne disease and water wash diseases, including other diseases like our mosquito-borne diseases and other vector-borne diseases in these situations. Cholera specifically lives and thrives in warm, brackish water. And so we see a lot of cholera outbreaks after extreme weather events as well. And as our climate changes and those extreme weather events increase in their frequency and ferocity, we're going to see more of these outbreaks and more of these epidemics. Beyond increased water, we also need to pay attention to drought and waterborne disease and the relationship between those two. Again, when we talk about populations that are forced to use surface water as their water sources, here we can see during drought situations, we have increased populations that begin using the same water sources. So if those smaller water sources become infected, the transmission and the number of people that those water sources are able to infect actually increases. So in a situation, we see increased water can increase waterborne disease, but a decrease in access to water also increases the risk of transmission from waterborne disease. When we look at other types of environmental change, we can actually see Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases in the United States actually show a good relationship of landscape change as well as climate change. Tick-borne diseases in the United States include Lyme disease, which is our most common vector-borne disease in the United States. We have about 30,000 confirmed cases per year, but the CDC estimates that the true total can be anywhere from 3 to 12 times higher than that. Other diseases include anaplasma, babesia, as well as ehrlichiosis. And we have a new emergent virus, which is Powassan encephalitis, that we're beginning seeing in our ticks as well. Due to climate change, we're seeing an increase in the tick range. So where we're actually seeing these species of ticks and where they're living and reproducing. There's a slow march happening across the United States right now. You can see the tick range on top through 1996, and then compare that to the tick range in 2015 on the bottom. And you can see a massive expansion in the range of ticks. This is also playing out within the number of cases of Lyme disease that we're seeing. Here you can see the density of Lyme disease, specifically in New England, with a focus point in Minnesota and Wisconsin as well. But if you compare 2001 to 2015, you can see that density changing and that explosion of cases, as well as the geographical expansion and geographical range of Lyme disease. Some of the other variables that we're seeing in addition to climate change that is supporting the expansion of Lyme disease, is going to be our landscape fragmentation. We tend to see higher tick populations engaging with humans in order to have that transmission of Lyme disease in areas where there's a lot of forest edge or a lot of edge between residential areas and natural areas. And as you can see in the bottom, if you look at an intact landscape, there's less area where human beings are engaging with that landscape. But as you go from low fragmentation to highest fragmentation, you begin seeing much more area where human beings are engaging with the forest edge or with the landscape edges. And so you're increasing, again, that contact between urban areas and suburban areas where we're seeing a lot of Lyme disease transmission and natural areas. Here we can also see this change is actually changing our tick populations as well. The blue line on top is dermacenter, which is one genus of ticks. It transmits Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but it's not our main vector of tick-borne disease in the United States. Ixodes scapularis is going to be our main vector of tick-borne disease in the United States, specifically the main vector of Lyme disease. Here you can see this is in Minnesota around the Twin Cities. And in 1990, when we were collecting ticks in Minnesota, specifically off of rodents that were being captured, greater than 90% of those ticks that we were capturing were dermacenter, so the dog ticks or wood ticks, and not our main vector of Lyme disease. You can see in 1990, very few of those ticks that we collected comparatively were Ixodes. However, you can see the linear change over time. And now we've had almost in Minnesota a complete flip in the populations that we're collecting. So an increased burden in Ixodes ticks, our Lyme disease vector, and a decreased presence in dermacenter. So this is bringing up a lot of questions about how climate change and landscape change is even dramatically changing the populations of insects that are in many of these areas, which can increase our risk of disease transmission. But going back to COVID-19 and looking at COVID-19 and how all of this is playing into the emergence and spread of COVID-19, we can see already that most of the evidence that we have is that COVID-19 was a natural spillover event from animals in China. Specifically, a lot of the data and genetic data that we're looking at is pointing to a combination of bat coronavirus meeting a pangolin coronavirus and something mixing there, similar to how we saw pigs and bats mixing and pigs and horses mixing previously. But in this situation, we had a genetic change that occurred when that bat met that pangolin, possibly, which then led to a version of a coronavirus that was able to get into human beings and become a human pathogen and then transmit amongst people. In that perfect storm scenario, we also had it introduced into a high density area with a large human population where it was then able to transmit very readily and very quickly from person to person. And then meeting that large density, large population, adding on top of that the increased globalization and increased global travel that we currently have, we were able to see the spread globally very quickly. And I think that, we're still learning lessons about what COVID-19 is teaching us, but some of the big lessons that I think we should pay attention to from COVID-19 is whether COVID-19 is just the first round of one of these big, quick global pandemics that we're going to have, and what we can learn from this. I think that a lot of people were shocked when something like COVID-19 showed up and then spread globally. But I think the public health world has been kind of banging this drum for a while. As you can see from many of the pathogens I've already talked about in this talk, that we've been seeing the warning shots of global pandemics for a while now. And I think COVID-19 might just be that first round of what we're about to deal with in the future. What it did do is exposed our flaws in our public health systems, as well as our systemic inadequacies, and able to deal with a pandemic that happens as quickly as this one does, as well as a respiratory pandemic that is happening the way that it is. I think it also showed our political inability for many of our countries to communicate effectively, and pointed to where we need to focus and work on building these responses, and not just building individual country responses, but building global responses and systemic responses. One thing that I hope that came out of this is that it showed the importance of public health and the importance of supporting public health. It also showed where we need to work on health communication and scientific communication. And I think this harkens back to what Dr. Ames was saying before my talk. The importance of how we communicate with populations and make sure that they understand what they can and should be doing, as well as communicating scientific information in ways that are easily digestible and understandable, and having a unified response when we're communicating about what we don't know. And I think that that's really important as well. The other thing that I think is important for the developed world specifically is understanding that infectious disease is a threat. I feel like in the past couple of decades, there is a movement in the developed world to focus on heart disease and cancer and these lifestyle diseases, and look at infectious disease as something that happens elsewhere. And I think that COVID-19 was a wake-up call that as humans, we are all exposed to infectious disease, and infectious disease is a threat to all of us. In a lot of public health classes, you'll see charts like this shown, which talks about the epidemiological transition. The idea that societies, as they develop, move from stage 1, where they're really focusing on infectious disease and parasitic diseases in the development process. But then you get to stage 3 and 4, where we're really more focused on chronic diseases. But I think as a globe, we really need to understand that we are no longer small societies and countries that are not related to each other and are not connected to each other. We're all connected to each other, and many of these infectious disease threats that might infect one country or impact one country are actually threats for all of us. And we really need to look at these from a global viewpoint. And we need to make sure that we're using data and knowledge in order to predict, plan, prepare, and prevent these diseases. And I think the best system that we can look at is one that's been emerging over the past decade, which is a One Health viewpoint. And hopefully the talk that I've given today supports the need for this viewpoint. This is where we need to break down the silos of human health, animal health, and environmental health. We need to have ecologists, veterinarians, people who work with wildlife populations and sustainability, just as engaged in public health as doctors and nurses and public health practitioners and community health educators are. We need to have human health, animal health, and environmental health looked at together holistically in a way that we can understand and engage with how interrelated these three things are. And that environmental health impacts animal health, which can then spill over into human health and vice versa. And so when I think that we start looking at policy decisions in the future, we need to look at policy decisions that have One Health in mind and that are understanding this complex ecology and relationship between humans, animals, and the environment. Thank you very much. Now open it for any questions.
Thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Bennett. My name is Mark Geisler, Associate Dean in the college, and I am going to articulate questions we received from before the talk and during the talk. The first question from Rebecca I'll ask is, how do you imagine state universities partnering with public high schools in Washington to support the transitions throughout the educational experience? How are teaching programs in the university preparing new teachers to shift to resilient ways of engaging?
I think one of the important things when we think about the university engaging with the community as well as other schools is to, and we talk about this a lot within academic settings and university settings, but breaking down the silos and trying to figure out ways that we can have public health programs on universities, work with education programs on universities, and then engage with the public and engage with communities in those ways. One of the things that we've been talking about on Western's campus is actually supporting a global health center and using that global health center on campus as a spot where all the colleges at the university are able to engage with health and look at things in an interdisciplinary manner, and then figure out how to support and engage with our local community, including local schools, and able to support them in responses to these types of challenges that we see. You know, I was talking about One Health, looking at animals, environment, and human health. But I think this question even brings up the ideas of how public health and the College of Education could coordinate to support our community as well.
Thank you. We have a question, I think, that goes to your point about improving our scientific communication, making it more understandable to people. The question makes a point that due to the kind of the free play of the signifier, or the way that we're looking at words and facts, we're detaching words from reality and meaning. And that maybe has undermined the ability of people to get reliable information from the media. What are your thoughts on language and its role in promoting public health?
Yeah, it's challenging, especially when the idea that we, you know, three of the words that we hear bandied around currently are things like endemic, epidemic, pandemic, and outbreak. You know, epidemic and outbreak essentially mean the same thing, but they have very different emotional responses when people see those words, and they're used with different connotations. And then even the general public trying to understand what is the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. And we talk a lot about the politicization of these words and the challenges of these words. We've seen this challenge continuously through public health. It's one of the reasons why we have challenges around vaccination and communications around vaccination, making sure that people are able to engage with scientific information in a way that's understandable. And I really like to flip this back on us as public health professionals. I think that often these are our failures in communications rather than the failures of communities in general. I think sometimes in public health and community health, we assume that people understand the nuance of the science that we've been spending a decade reading nonstop. And that assumption leads to failures in communication. And so we need to make sure that we're meeting communities where they're at in order to work with communities and increase understanding. And I think this comes with the media needing to engage public health professionals and helping to craft their messages as well. And the media needing to rather than going to politicians or various television stations, what we refer to as the talking heads of pundits, and rather than having pundits talking about public health, why not bring in public health professionals and who are trained on these matters and have them speak about public health to make sure that messages are clear and unified.
Thank you. It sounds like you're making a call for some interdisciplinary interaction between our journalism and public health programs.
Public health is nothing if not interdisciplinary.
This question is for Evelyn. How does poor nutrition affect the environment that may be promoting or setting up the conditions for increased pandemics?
We know from a lot of many years of research, particularly we start with children and then adults, and now we're talking about food deserts and the importance of doing something about that. But I think as people understand, when little bodies develop, they need food, nutrition, and families need good nutrition. And if in the developmental stages, children don't have the nutrients to develop the immunity system, the antibodies, etc., and the strength, you might say, it affects them as they grow older. And the weaker, not weaker, but the less healthy our young people are, they will be less healthy when they're older adults. And as Stephen didn't say, but one vulnerable group for this COVID-19 is my age group, but it's also other age groups. But I'm not sure if, I'll just go back and say, in schools, we know that when children don't have a breakfast at home, if children don't have food at home, they do not do well in school. Their brains do not do that, are not well developed, and that carries on for the life of that child. And that's in a nutshell, to say that it affects them from the very beginning.
Thank you, Dr. Ames. So you're making an interesting parallel, I'm hearing, between what Dr. Bennett, the point that he made about animals and the new husbandry leading to animals being less prepared to deal with, have less resilience. There is a less resilience too that happens with malnutrition.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, Dr. Bennett, there's a pretty quick question. Why isn't there a vaccine for malaria? Is that a possibility?
They've been working on a vaccine for malaria. There's one that we've been, I'm not working on it, but we as public health in general are working on, specifically trying to target children. One of the challenges that we have with the vaccine for malaria is that we're dealing with a protozoan versus a virus or a bacteria. So it has a very complicated life cycle, and trying to have a vaccine that specifically attacks that life cycle can be really challenging. Also, one of the things that's challenging with a vaccine is depending upon how the immunity from that vaccine and how long it lasts could lead to future exposure for these children where they weren't able to build immunity over time. But one of the biggest challenges that we have is the extremely complicated life cycle of the Plasmodium, which is the protozoan that causes malaria. It has 10 very different forms that it's in throughout the human body as well as the mosquito body.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. How do scientists believe the pangolin fits within the transmission sequence? Could you just go over that again, or just outline it? And why is that a lot more persuasive? And I'm connecting it with another question than the rumors that it's been created in a lab.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things is that virologists and microbiologists are actually able to take viruses and completely sequence them. And break down their RNA sequences and look at how they're built. And we can see a lot of natural coronaviruses that are regularly transmitted among multiple types of animals. We have four coronaviruses that actually regularly transmit amongst people and essentially function as cold type viruses throughout our populations. But we have three that have pandemic potential. The first one was SARS. The second one was MERS, which is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and then COVID-19 being the third. All three of these have natural animal reservoirs. And so by comparing COVID-19, so SARS-CoV-2, to MERS and SARS-CoV-1, as well as naturally occurring coronaviruses that regularly transmit among animal populations, we essentially are able to look at these sequences and put the puzzle pieces together to see what natural versions they're related to. So it's essentially kind of like seeing two parents and then a child. And we're able to look at that child, say look at COVID-19 as being the child, and look at some of these natural coronaviruses that regularly transmit and are non-pathogenic to humans amongst animals. And that's the process that we've gone to. When we look at lab-created viruses, generally you see in a lab-created virus, they would have taken the backbone of an already pathogenic virus and essentially worked off of that. And you would essentially see non-natural building blocks being put into that virus. And that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing very different and naturally produced viruses with COVID-19. So the overwhelming evidence is that this was a situation where the person came up to an animal that had this virus at the wrong time. The virus was able to jump and then transmit from person to person. There's zero evidence that this virus was created in a lab.
Thank you. We have time for one more maybe a brief answer to this question, Dr. Bennett, and it's from a younger person maybe. And how do you recommend that younger people prepare for careers that engage with these issues, especially in a world that often requires specific educations to enter positions that affect policy and programs that would have an impact?
I would say anyone can engage with public health at any point in time. And I think people engage with public health more than they even realize. Every time we communicate about healthy choices and healthy decisions, every time you get involved in climate change marches, every time you talk about environmental movements, every time you try to decrease your own carbon footprint, think about what you eat, think about what you do, you're engaging in public health. And so I think that, you know, as educators, if you want to be a teacher, even in primary school or high school, figuring out how you can pull public health into your normal lessons and engage public health into your normal lessons. Public health can be involved in any discipline. I don't want you to think that you have to get a degree in public health to engage with public health. That being said, I would love for you to come to our program and engage with public health in our program, as I think that a public health degree can set you up for a lot of jobs and a lot of positions. And I think that we can see moving forward that public health is going to be an in-demand field.
Okay, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the excellent questions. There were so many. Now I'm going to pass it back to our beloved Dean.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody. We have reached the end of our time today. I want to thank Dr. Bennett and Dr. Ames for joining us today and giving this very interesting talk. I want to thank you all in our audience that have made this dialogue possible. And I also want to thank the Alumni Association for helping us co-host this event. Thank you all. And I wish everyone good health and an enjoyable day.
Right, stay well.
Thank you.